it's not like this is a political matter as much as it's an issue about fair trade and what the president has the power to do. And there is a good chance that the courts, including the Supreme Court, may just read into this statute that Donald Trump does not have this authority.
California is suing the Trump administration over its global tariffs, claiming the trade war is causing immediate and irreparable harm to the economy of the state. The lawsuit brought by California's Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom argues that President Trump's use of emergency powers to impose the sweeping tariffs is unlawful and unprecedented. And it goes on to talk about the damage it's doing to California, the largest economy, manufacturing and agricultural state in the nation. This is Governor Newsom speaking earlier this evening.
80 years of economic dominance in just a matter of weeks being unwound by this kind of recklessness. And so we are here very mindful of the anxiety that this has imposed on all of you and very mindful of our role and responsibility at this moment, not to be bystanders and try to shape this debate and shape this conversation in this lawsuit is a meaningful and justifiable effort to do just that, to be accountable at this critical moment in not just California history, but American and world history.
Gavin Newsom. Well, it comes as a US judge has said he could hold the Trump administration in contempt of court for willful disregard of an order to halt the departure of deportation flights carrying more than 200 people to El Salvador. Earlier this evening, the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, defended the decision to deport a Salvadorian citizen, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, from Maryland.
Today, we have officially learned Democrat officials still refuse to accept the will of the American people. Maryland Democrat Senator Chris Van Hollen rushed to Dulles Airport this morning to fly to El Salvador, potentially using taxpayer dollars, to demand the release of deported, illegal, alien MS-13 terrorist. The Democrats and the media in this room have continually and wrongly labeled Kilmar Abrego Garcia as a Maryland father. There is no Maryland father. Let me reiterate. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is an illegal alien, MS-13 gang member and foreign terrorist who was deported back to his home country.
Well, that was the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt speaking just a short time ago. Nick Akerman is a former assistant US attorney and a former assistant special Watergate prosecutor. Good evening to you, Nick.
Good evening to you. Good to be here.
Well, really good to have you with us. Two really interesting legal cases. Perhaps we'll just start on what we were hearing there from the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, about this case of the Salvadorian Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Caroline Leavitt is insisting he's an illegal alien, but I believe there was an earlier court ruling that he was entitled to be living there in Maryland. What do you make of this case?
Well, I just think it's an absolute outrage. The government and the Department of Justice has already conceded that he was sent to El Salvador by mistake. He was sent there in violation of another judge's order that basically found that he was not a terrorist, he was not a member of the gang, and should never have been sent there in the first place. But yet now they're digging in, they're calling him a terrorist, they're calling him part of this organized crime gang. It's absolutely an outrage. It just means that they can take anybody off the streets, throw him on a plane, and put him in this hellhole of a prison in El Salvador, even after admitting that they did it by mistake. The idea that they're complaining that Senator Haaland is going to Maryland, to El Salvador, to try and release him and using taxpayers' money is an absolute outrage when you consider the amount of taxpayers' money the Trump administration used in deporting all of those individuals to that prison in El Salvador without a hearing, without any due process.
And of course, Garcia, is just one of more than 200 people who were sent to El Salvador last month. We understand that most of them are being held in this notoriously brutal, huge prison. But when El Salvador's president, Bukele, was at the White House with President Trump earlier this week, both leaders insisted that they were perfectly happy for Garcia to be sent there, and indeed that President Trump was saying he wants to send more people there.
Well, and including people who are American citizens. That's what he's talking about. He was talking to the president of El Salvador about putting up 5 more prisons. This is absolutely a total abuse of power. It's contrary to what our Supreme Court has already found. All of those people that were sent to that prison were denied due process and the right to contest the fact that they were members of that gang in a normal court hearing. The fact of the matter is, we know that the way that they picked people who were members of this gang were based on tattoos that they had or the way they dressed. It turns out that somebody who's an expert on this Venezuelan gang has said that none of these gang members do have tattoos. That's not part of the gang. And the kinds of clothing that they were wearing basically were the kind of standard fashion that you see a lot of people wearing in the United States. They're just picking on people, trying to make a big issue out of this and trying to send a lot of people to this prison, even though they can't prove that most of these people are members of this Venezuelan gang.
So, I mean, where does this leave the Trump administration legally? Because we're now seeing that this federal judge, James Boasberg, ordered a halt to the deportations. They went ahead in any case. He's now saying that the Trump administration could be held in contempt of court. That presumably would be pretty unprecedented, wouldn't it?
Totally unprecedented. I can't even think of an occasion when the United States Department of Justice, any of their attorneys, or the government of the United States has ever been held in contempt by a federal judge. If you look at that opinion, which is a really well-organized, well-reasoned opinion, he comes up with the very details about how the government knew precisely what his order was, his direction that if there are planes in the sky, they're to be turned around and brought back to the United States. He does it by a timeline, by information that they've gathered through independent means to show when the planes were in the sky, when they arrived in El Salvador. And he's basically set out in this opinion what I would consider to be an indictment for contempt. I mean, he basically calls it probable cause, just like you would go to a grand jury in the United States to get an indictment. And it's all laid out in this opinion. And he's basically given him 2 choices. Either follow his order now, provide the information, get these people back, or he's going to go ahead with contempt proceedings. And part of that is going to be just like this judge in Maryland has done with respect to Mr. Garcia, is to start taking testimonies, start taking names, and find out who's responsible. And some of these people may wind up in prison before it's over.
But President Trump has made it quite clear he doesn't intend to stop these deportation flights, and we heard that defiant message from his press secretary there. I mean, what in practical terms, what powers does a court like this federal court have over the administration, which appears to be using emergency powers in this case?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One, it's just putting together the facts and publicizing them to the public. This Garcia case has absolutely reached across the country now. People are understanding it. People are focused on it, and they know that this is not fair. It's not the American way, and it's not the way we do things in our country. Secondly, there can be some real consequences for people who are involved in this. It may not mean that Donald Trump is going to jail, but certainly other people could wind up in big trouble on this because they just happen to follow his orders and do his bidding. So even lawyers from the Department of Justice could wind up losing their law licenses. They could be like Rudy Giuliani, who no longer is able to practice law for perpetrating the big lie about Donald Trump having won the 2020 election. So there are a number of consequences here that could really put a stop to what's going on.
I want to ask you about this other case. California, the state of California, suing the Trump administration over its global tariffs. Gavin Newsom, the governor, saying that Trump's use of emergency powers is unlawful, unprecedented, and talking about the immediate and irreparable harm to California that's being caused by his tariffs. What do you make of this case? I mean, is this something that could have an actual effect on the whole trade war that we're seeing at the moment?
Oh, absolutely. Donald Trump is relying on this International Emergency Economic Power Act. And as the complaint in California points out, there is nothing in there about tariffs or about putting tariffs up in response to an emergency. In fact, what the complaint argues is that tariffs are a tax like any other tax, which are confined, the power is confined solely to Congress and is not something that the president can just make up as he goes along. So there's a real chance that this case may gain some traction. And don't forget, it's not the only case that's out there. Previously, there was another case that's been filed on behalf of a number of small businesses that's now pending before the U.S. Court of International Trade. And they're making the same exact arguments there, that Donald Trump has exceeded his constitutional powers, his statutory powers. And this may, between the two cases, I mean, these are two cases to really watch because, like I say, you never know where they're going to go and how judges are going to react to these.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump, of course, has had plenty of battles with the courts in the past. And this lawsuit is being brought by a Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom. Will he not, President Trump, just use this to say, look, it's all politically motivated? California may be complaining about this, but of course President Trump insists that in the long term the tariffs are going to be good. I mean, does he have the legal powers necessary to continue to impose these global tariffs? Some of them, of course, have been wound back somewhat, but there are still some pretty big tariffs, 10% on most goods that are imported into the US.
Oh, that's right. And look, the question is whether this is going to be unwound is going to be answered by the courts. It's not going to be answered by him accusing the governor of California of being a Democrat and being political about this. And like I say, there is a totally separate case that is doing the same thing that is being brought by some fairly conservative actors that are pushing this case. So you've got not only Gavin Newsom, who is a liberal Democrat, but you've also got people who are fairly well-known conservative Republicans that are also attacking this tariff power in a totally separate court for victims of these tariffs that are small businesses in this country. So it's not like this is a political matter as much as it's an issue about fair trade and what the president has the power to do. And there is a good chance that the courts, including the Supreme Court, may just read into this statute that Donald Trump does not have this authority.
Well, just one more thought on that, because you mentioned the Supreme Court there. It is pretty heavily weighted in President Trump's favor, isn't it? I mean, if these cases do go to the Supreme Court, and of course, Donald Trump's shown a great willingness to battle court cases as long as it takes. If it does come to the Supreme Court, do you think that the president can rely on rulings in his favor?
Well, he certainly didn't get one last week on this Garcia matter. It was 9-0 that the government had to facilitate that Garcia come back to the U.S. And Donald Trump has just taken that, turned it around, and declared he got a victory 9-0, which is absolutely insane. And I think what's going to happen is after the judge in Maryland brings out all the facts, puts it together, pressure is going to build on the administration to do something about it. And the same thing could happen with these tariffs. They are not at all popular in the United States. Nobody really likes them. They're hurting a lot of people, and it keeps going back and forth. It's erratic from one day to the next. He can't even figure out what the justification is for these tariffs, which again is probably going to hurt him in the courts, because he's claiming on one hand that it's an emergency, and on the other hand, he's claiming, well, he's just trying to somehow get the balance of trade more favorable to the United States, or he's trying to stop a drug problem that doesn't exist, or he's trying to stop an immigration problem that no longer really exists. So he's got some problems here.
Nick Akerman, former Assistant US Attorney. Really good to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Well, Marcus, who's been getting in touch with lots of messages over the last few days, saying, why is the complete lawlessness of the Trump action not a matter of our discussion? I hope you will be enlightened by that discussion there with Nick Akerman, former Assistant US Attorney.